A week has passed since the resurrection of Christ. The emotions of the disciples have been both high and low. They've experienced a full range of emotion. And at this point, they were confused. There was a lot that they did not understand. They could not put their arms around it. They could not embrace it. They were just confused. And that's what leads us to John chapter 21. They didn't know exactly what to do. The best thing you can do when you don't know what to do is do the only thing you know to do. And for them, it was to go fishing. I thought that kind of made sense. They went fishing. You know what? God likes to show up when we get quiet. You know that? When we get quiet before God, when things are going on in our lives and we don't understand and we don't know what's going on, God likes for us to get quiet. For them, it was, let's go fishing. For someone else, it might be go hit a white little ball around on some green somewhere. For others, it might be go pull weeds out of your garden. And you see, it really doesn't matter what it is, just so you get quiet before God. And you know what? When you get quiet before God, God has a tendency to show up. He has a tendency to show up. They had fished all night. They fished all night. I've done that, have you? I've got a couple of pictures I'd like to show you. Let's have the first one. Here's Rick. Rick had little faith. His little fish. He kind of looks like he fished all night too. Look at them eyes. He had a rough one. Okay, let's have the next one. Here's Butch. Kind of looks like a wannabe. He was proud of that little fish. Okay, let's have the next picture. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I got on the cover of a magazine. Outdoors. Huh? Actually, that was a little lie there, okay? But it is supposed to be a cover, all right? Here's the next picture. Jonah Bob. Jonah Bob. Can you see that fish? Incidentally, that is a real fish. Somebody asked me about that. That is real. It was 30-some pounds, I think. It was huge. It was big. He probably pumped it with air, though. I don't know. But anyhow, hey, I just kind of want to show off them pictures a little bit. That has absolutely nothing to do with my message. But the disciples got close to shore. They had fished all night. They had caught nothing. And Jesus is there. And Jesus says, throw the nets on the other side. And they did. Out of obedience, they did. And lo and behold, the fish started coming. And they came, and they came, and they came. And there were so many fish, the Bible says that the nets about broke as they were gathering it up. John tells us that there were 153 fish in the net. I mentioned, it was last week, I mentioned about that and said that I had read somewhere that somebody said that there were 153 different types of fish in the Sea of Galilee. Think about that. Wouldn't it have been cool if God would have put one of every kind in that net? That certainly would have been a miracle. And I don't know. I'll tell you something else John tells us. That these fish were not like Butch's fish. They were They were big fish. They were large fish. You know, Jesus called them to come and have breakfast, and that's a message all in itself. And we're not going to even cover that. But they had had breakfast. Jesus had broken bread with them. They were sitting around now, probably this little fire that they had built where they cooked their fish. And as they were doing some small talking, and breakfast was over, Jesus turns to Peter. And he says, Peter, son of John, or son of Jonah, depends on what translation you may have. And he wants to get his attention. Now, there were reasons why I believe that Jesus asked Peter, called out Peter, or singled out Peter. And I want you to note that Peter's leadership needed to be reinforced publicly among the disciples. You see, the disciples knew that Peter had denied him. They knew about that. And they perhaps were all feeling a bit guilty because it tells us in the Gospels that they all stood afar off. And they were all dealing with their own guilt of some type. But I believe that Jesus wanted to reaffirm Peter's leadership, and so he calls him. Jesus had to make sure that Peter would never deny him nor forsake him again. And he wanted to be sure that he realized that he had a mission and that God wasn't done with him. And Jesus needed to teach all of his disciples that day a very basic, important lesson. A lesson, a principle that goes beyond any other lesson that we could possibly know, or principle that there is. The greatest principle is this: without love, one is only a resounding gong and a clanging cymbal. The greatest of all principles is love. Loving God with all of our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And we're going to be talking about that. A man may be gifted in so many ways, but if they do not have the love of God in their hearts, all of their gifts mean nothing. They're nothing without the love of God. The love of God is the greatest of all gifts. Jesus looks at Peter and he calls him by his full name. I have no way of knowing for sure why he did that, except to think that maybe he really wanted to get his attention. You know what happens when your kids, anybody ever do this? When your kids were growing up and they were about to do something, or you wanted to get their attention right away, you called them by their full name? Many a time, we had to say, Jeremy Mark, or Hannah Dawn. Now, Deb and I, we don't do that. Our term usually around the house is babe. Hey, babe. When we want their attention, when we're not happy, it's Debbie. Of course, it's always babe for me, you know. But anyhow, you get my point. And I believe that what Jesus was doing is they were sitting around this fire, and as they were doing some small talking, just chit-chatting. I can imagine them telling men how tired they are and just griping about, fished all night, and then all of a sudden Jesus shows up, and now we got this huge, this big net of fish, and now what are we going to do with all these fish we got, And they were just small talking. But then all of a sudden Jesus turns to Peter and he says, Peter, son of John. And I believe Jesus was wanting to get his attention. Not only was he wanting to get Peter's attention, I believe he was wanting to get all the other disciples' attention as well. Because when you called your kid by their middle name, if you said, Jeremy Matthew or whatever the name of your middle kid is, all the other siblings got quiet as well. Mom or dad, they were getting ready to come down, And he had his attention. He had the disciples' attention because he called them by name. As we look at these 3 questions that Jesus asked Peter, I believe there's a reason why he asked the 3 questions. And that's kind of what we want to cover today. Number 1, he says, the first question was, Peter, do you love me more than these? Do you love me more than these? It's been debated on what he meant by these. Did he mean, do you love me more than your friends? Your sibling? Did you love me more than, or do you love me more than you love James and John? Or do you love me more than you love your brother, Andrew? Or did he mean, Peter, do you love me more than these? More than the fish? More than the boats? More than the nets? More than your occupation? More than your profession? Peter, do you love me more than all of these? Or maybe John just wrote that because he really wasn't sure. Maybe he wanted us to think that it was everything. Maybe Jesus was asking Peter, do you love me more than anything else? And Peter responds. I want you to notice, Jesus said to Peter, do you love? Do you agape me? And we're going to talk about that word agape. That's a Greek word for love. He says, Peter, do you agape me more than these? Peter responds, and he says, Lord, you know I philia you. You know I philia you. I love you. But it was a different Greek word. Jesus then says again, Peter, son of Jonas, do you agape me? Now this time he didn't add more than these. He said, Peter, do you agape me? Do you love me? Do you love me? And Peter responds the second time. And he says, Lord, I philia you. I philia you. What were they saying? Up to this point, the disciples could not fully comprehend the word love that Jesus was using. They could not understand that term agape. Agape is the highest form of love. Agape is a love of the mind. It is a love of the will. It is a love that chooses. It is the highest form of love. They seen that love for the first time lived out, played out in the life of Christ when He hung on the Calvary's cross. For the very first time, they seen agape love. But up to this point, they hadn't experienced it in their own hearts and in their own life. That's why Peter could not say, Lord, I agape you. Because he didn't. He couldn't. It was impossible to this point. What he was saying was, Lord, I philia you. I love you like a brother. I love you like my brother Andrew. I love you like I love these disciples. I love you like a friend. And then Jesus goes to the third question. And he says, Peter, son of Jonas, do you philia me? Do you philia me? He used that human term that they could grasp, that they could understand. And Peter was offended. And Peter said, Lord, you know my love. You know I philia you. I love you like a brother. You know. You see, the disciples knew what it was to lay down a life for a brother. In fact, Jesus told them. He told them in his high priestly prayer. He said that he was going to the cross and he was going to lay down his life because of his friends. But you know what Jesus also said? Jesus said, love your enemies. Jesus showed them love in action. Jesus showed them how to love an enemy by laying down his life for the enemy. Jesus showed them agape love. Now, let me explain the difference in the loves. Philia love is that love of tender affection, of warm and deep feelings. That warm and deep feelings within the heart. It is the deep and precious love of those near and dear to one's heart. It's brotherly love. It's a love that would die for a brother or a friend. But agape love. Agape is that love of the mind. It's that love of the reason. It's a love of the will. It is a love that is born of choice. I will choose to love you. One simply chooses to love regardless of how one feels. A person may insult you, or a person may injure you. A person may bring harm to you. A person may stab you in the back. But it is that love that willfully chooses to love in spite of the hurt and the misdemeanor that is done against you. It is a love that reaches out and chooses to love even the enemy. And Jesus says that we are to agape. We are to love our enemy. We are to love our enemy. Now, Peter couldn't grasp that. He could not quite understand that, really what that term meant. And really it was a term that nobody could really grasp and understand until after Christ. Because nobody could love like Christ loved. Nobody laid down their life for the enemy like Christ laid down His life. And Jesus was trying to prepare His disciples for a new kind of love. A love that would go so deep that they would give their very life for. A love that would spread the gospel of Jesus Christ around the world and would never stop. A love that even today ministers and touches and changes hearts and lives. A love that would love God with every being within us. And that is why Christ said, the greatest commandment is to agape, is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, and with all your soul. And then to agape your neighbor as yourself. What's He saying? He's saying to love. Love is a choice. Love is the moving of your will to love, even when sometimes it seems impossible to do it. Love your enemy. That's why Peter was saying, Lord, I philia you. I love you like a brother. I love you like a brother. But you see, up to this point in Peter's heart, agape love wasn't there. Because you see, there is only one way that we can agape love. And that is through the Spirit of the living God living within our lives. Without the Spirit of the living God, it is absolutely impossible to agape. We cannot. We cannot. Because God is the source of agape love. And without the Spirit of God living within our hearts, we cannot love. You see, the Spirit of God had not yet been released. And that is why the disciples, and that is why Peter could not say, Lord, I agape you. I love you. But you know what? We find later something happened and something changed. Didn't it? It certainly did. Agape love is more than an emotional love. It is a matter of the will. It is a matter of the heart. It is the surrender. The agape love is the love made up of the very nature of God, the sacrificing and the giving of ourselves. Agape love is the Spirit of God within the heart and the believer. Agape love is the love in which believers are to have for all men. Even those we may not particularly care for or we may not like. Even our enemies. Agape love is proven by obedience to Christ and in our service to Him. And I mentioned that up to this point, the disciples, they could not understand. They did not know what agape love was. Although they seen it portrayed in the life of Christ. As He died for His enemies. As He forgave His enemies while hanging on an old Roman cross. And then Jesus goes on to tell Peter how he was going to die. And that Peter was going to die by the hands of his enemy. But He said to Peter, Peter, follow me. Follow me. And what God was saying, what the Lord was saying to Peter was, Peter, I understand. I know all about this agape love stuff. I know all about this philia love stuff. But what He was saying to Peter, Peter, there's going to come a time, there's going to come a day in your life when you are going to agape me. You are going to love me. And you will follow me. Even to death. You will follow me even to death. Because you will lay down your life by the hands of your enemy. Tradition tells us that Peter was hung upside down on a cross. He didn't feel worthy to die, to suffer like his Lord. Peter gave his life for the church. Peter gave his life for Christ, for God, for the kingdom. Why? Because he agape'd Him. One of the fruits of the Spirit is what? Love. Not philia love. It's agape love. It's agape love. Because you see, this love, this agape love, is only a God thing. And without the fullness of the Spirit of the living God within our lives, we cannot agape God. We cannot love Him. We cannot love our enemies. Oh, we can philia. We can love people like we love our friends and we love our brothers and our sisters. But you see, God's love goes far beyond that. God's love says agape. God's love says love your enemies. Lay your life down for your enemies. Sacrifice for your enemies. Give of yourself for your enemies, if that's what it takes. Show the love of God in your life. The world expects us to philia. The world expects us to love our brothers, to love our friends. But you see, the world doesn't expect you to love your enemies because they have no concept of what that's all about. And they can't do it. But what happens when the world sees a Christian agapeing? What does the world say? What do they think when they see the Christian agapeing their enemies? Loving those who are unlovable. Loving those who have stabbed them in the back. Or loving those who don't understand. Or loving those who you just can't get along with. They marvel. And they say, I want what they have. I want what they have. Let me close with this. It was Gustave Doré who was putting his finishing touches on the face of Christ on one of his paintings that he was doing. And unbeknown to him, an admirer came in his studio. And all of a sudden, he heard her in the background. And he said, "Oh, ma'am, I'm sorry, I didn't realize you were there." And she said, "Oh, Gustave, that picture of Jesus is beautiful. It's beautiful." His response was this. Oh, she went on to say, not only is it beautiful, but she said, "You must really love him. You must really love him." And his response was this, "Madam, if I only loved him more, I could paint him better. If I only loved him more, I could paint him better." How's our service to the Master? How much do we love? If we only loved him more, maybe we could serve him better. If we only loved him more, maybe we could love more. How much do you love Jesus Christ this morning? Can you honestly, truthfully say, "Lord, I agape you. I love you with all of my heart, with all of my mind, with all of my soul, with all of my being. I love you. I agape you." Will you stand with me? Father, as we take these moments to wait in your presence this morning, I don't know who's here that you might be speaking to, but we certainly want to give opportunity. And Lord, I pray that you would drive the truth of this sermon home to each and every heart. Lord, what you want for our life is for us to agape you. You want us to love you with all of our heart, with all of our being, with everything that is within us. And it goes beyond our feelings. It goes beyond our emotions. It's a choice of the will. And that can only happen as we surrender our lives. And as we choose moment by moment to stay in the center of your will and to love you. It comes down to a choice that we have to make. And Father, I don't know who's here this morning that needs this experience in their life. But one thing I do know is that you've called all of us to have this experience. And I know that it's your will that we all have this experience. And yet I also know that the chances are that many of us may not. And so, Father, I pray that you would speak. And I pray that you would move. And I pray that you would deal. And I pray that you would accomplish the very thing that you want to accomplish. And with our heads bowed and our eyes closed this morning, we certainly want to give opportunity. If there's anyone here that would like to come and pray, we want to pray with you. The greatest experience in the world is that love that I've talked about this morning. It's wonderful to be saved. It's wonderful to know that our sins are forgiven and we've been washed in the blood of the Lamb. And it's awesome to know that guilt is gone. But I'll tell you what, folks, to have that experience of heart purity, to have that experience of agape love that helps you to love those that you may not understand and you may not be able to agree with and may stab you in the back, and to love your enemies, there is absolutely nothing like it in the world. And that's an experience that only God can give us through His Spirit as He cleanses us and fills us with His presence. Is there anyone who would like to just step out where you are and come and pray with me? Maybe this morning you'd like to raise your hand, signifying that you have a need in your heart. And you'd like me to pray with you or pray for you. Would you just slip your hand? I see that hand. Is there another? I see that hand. Another? Anyone else would say, I see that hand? Pastor, pray for me. I'm not where I really want to be and need to be in my own journey. And I want you to pray for me. Anyone else? I see that hand. And that one. I see that one. Hey, all over the church. You know, we're not here to embarrass, point people out. That's not what it's about. We love you in Christ. We want God to reveal Himself to you afresh and anew. We want you to give your life completely, entirely over to Him. And it is amazing what God can do when He has full control of our life. I will be praying for you. And I want you to know, if you want to come and talk with me, we're here for you. Call the office. We can set up an appointment. You know, come by, call me on my cell phone, whatever. We're here for you. We want to help you. We want to pray with you. Because that's what it's about. Father, I pray for those that have raised their hands. I thank you that your Spirit is working and moving. And I just pray that you would continue to minister throughout this week. Will you drive this truth home to each and every heart? Father, get us to that place where you want us to be. Lord, revival can come if revival will start within us as we are obedient to you. And so help us, Lord, I pray. Go with us now as we go our separate ways. Bring us back again safely this evening. And for all that you do, we'll praise your name. Amen. You are dismissed. May God bless you.